All right. Hey, everyone. So I'm just going to give a little bit of context for why we're doing this, what the hell's going on. And then I'll let Erik and Alex, who are actually doing the hard work, along with Jen Helder and Tom, who's been porting this whole thing to JavaScript. We're trying to, because it's moving fast. Hopefully the bulk of the discussion will be with them. But yeah, Project Zenith is a continuation of several initiatives that were going on organically that many of you, I think, are familiar with. And we just realized they were interconnected and we combined them into a more meaty project. So specifically, there are three things going on. One is that we were trying to, well, there was interest in improving the experience of using Dagger directly through the command line, having a thing that you can actually use and maybe even show to your developers instead of having it be purely a library. It's great that it's a library, you can program it via the SDKs, et cetera, but it's been a recurrent topic. People say, well, where's the thing? Like, how do I do the Dagger thing from the shell, from the terminal, the way I can do it with, Docker, Earthly, basically every tool, every DevOps tool. And especially if you're more familiar with shell scripts and YAML than you are with Python or Go, then that would be very appreciated. So that was one thing that was going on, just a way to improve the CLI experience and make it more of a first-class citizen. Another thing that was going on is a desire to standardize the entry points for a Dagger environment. So especially in the context of CI, if you want to write any integration with Dagger that is a tool sitting in front of Dagger, let's say you want, well, starting with your CI, when you're configuring your CI and say, if this happens, then do this Dagger thing. This Dagger thing at the moment does not exist. There's no standardized way to say, run this thing in Dagger, perform this action. There's not even a standardized file to say, this is a Dagger environment, because as most of you know, in order to use Dagger for your team, for your project, you have to write your own custom tool with its own custom config files, directory layout, its own entry points. And then any integration from CI or any other developer-facing tool is going to be into that custom handmade tool. And of course, I know that this community really appreciates the flexibility, the fact that that you can do that. But the problem is that you have no choice but to do that. So that's a really high bar to entry, and it fragments the ecosystem. That means no one can write, for example, something that I would love to see, a dead simple CI system that is Dagger native. Because it turns out if you standardize on Dagger, you could write a pretty sweet CI system and 100 times less lines of code than the ones out there. You can't do that today because there's no, you couldn't just plug into any Dagger environment. So standardizing entry points is the second thing that was going on. And there's an issue that I'll link to that where a lot of that was being discussed. And the third thing that was going on is just the extensions. There's an important part of the Dagger promise that is not yet delivered, which is that you can encode a complex pipeline, a complex workflow using Dagger, and then you can encapsulate that in a way that someone else can incorporate it in their own pipeline, in their own workflow. So you have composition and an ecosystem of components that you can reuse across languages, right? Right now, the only way to do that is if you're using the Go SDK and you're writing your pipeline logic in Go, then you can encapsulate your pipeline logic in a Go function and put that in a Go package and then have other people use that Go package. But that's a little bit of a fragmented ecosystem, right? And I know some of you are doing that in pockets, but there are challenges to doing that. And, there's some friction. And even if you overcome the friction, you're still not collaborating with the entire Dagger community, right? Which was kind of the point. So we've been wanting to solve that for a while and, actually have some plumbing in place to do it, but never really shipped it. So anyway, those three threads were going on and we combined them. We realized they are very interconnected, in fact. And so we're combining them in what is now Project Zenith. So Project Zenith, it basically is an initiative to reinvent the Dagger user experience to make it more approachable to devs, more standardized, more focused on the CLI, and extensible. So it's a pretty meaty project. It's very early, so we're not launching this like next week or anything. This is not like a preview of a almost finished thing. It's the opposite. It's a first look at something that's barely started, but it's already showing some pretty cool potential. So yeah, I'm talking a lot to warn you that there's more to it maybe than what you'll see in the demo, but we wanted to err on the side of showing more. I'm going to stop for a second. Any questions?
It's looking
OpenShift for the rest of us.
Yeah, exactly.
That's actually it's so correct that it's uncanny. And also I'm just going to say, for me personally, Zenith is fulfilling the potential of Dagger, and part of the potential of Dagger is to continue sort of a revolution in how applications are made that started with Docker and in containers. And maybe I'll get in trouble for saying that, but I don't think it was really it went all the way. It was interrupted, and now everyone's talking about Kubernetes, but that's just the ops-centric part of it. The potential of containers was more than replacing VMs with containers in the data center. It was about how you develop your app, and I think that was kind of lost. And the fact that something like OpenShift can make $1 billion in ARR, that's how much money Red Hat is making selling OpenShift. They're making $1 billion a year selling OpenShift, which is in my mind the ultimate implementation of the old model, like one big monolithic platform. That's crazy to me. That's kind of a symbol of our failure to, finish the job. So hopefully Zenith will be the next step in getting there. Yeah. Okay. So that was a lot of talking. So the demo, let me share my screen. So all of this is based on this idea that there are two people involved. You can ignore my screen for a second. There are two hats to be worn here. There's a developer who just wants to write some code and get something done. And then there's, let's call him a platform engineer, someone who's there to make that developer as productive as possible, give them an environment in which they can do the work, an environment where they can run, they can build, test, deploy, etc. And of course, that platform engineer, that's most of you in this room, I think, because Dagger is one of the tools you could use to then make that developer more productive. And the developer today doesn't use Dagger directly. They use it indirectly, through a custom CLI tool. So here we're describing a UX that starts with that end user, and the hat they're wearing, we're going to call this the Robin Hood hat. And don't ask me why. Robin Hood hats I'm developing with the help of a Dagger environment. And on the other side, there's Top Hat. I'm creating the perfect environment using Dagger. So I'm such a Robin Hood hat. I'm it's not even funny. And so I'm going to focus on that part. I'm a developer, and I found this new open source project called Booklet, and it's created by Alex. And I just, I got time, so I want to contribute to it. So I just want to develop. And I asked him, hey, how can I contribute? How can I set up an environment to develop? And he said, well, use Dagger, have a Dagger environment. So, okay, great. So I'll have the Dagger CLI installed, and then I'll check out the repo. And then the general idea, and this is where I'm asking you to remember what I said in the beginning, early, not finished, etc. Through the Dagger CLI, I loaded environments created by Alex, who's wearing the top hat in the situation. And now I get everything I need to do my job. I have a complete environment. And of course, under the hood, it's a DAG, it's all containers. It's the same Dagger engine, And so for this demo, we're focusing on one aspect, one entry point for this environment, which is checks. Our general idea is, okay, what's in an environment? There are checks, things that either fail or pass, unit tests, integration tests, linting, etc. There's artifacts of all sorts, things that you build, things that you download, things that you train, and now, models, etc. There's a concept of a shell, like maybe I need an interactive shell to, to interact with the REPL, or I just need, to run commands in a container that's perfectly prepared for me. And then there's command line tools, custom tools. So basically, those are the entry points that we're offering right now. Oh, and services, things I want to bring up and connect to. So I'll focus on check for now. What are the checks in this environment? So the hint here, and we're going to talk about the architecture, everything's containerized, everything's running in Dagger, right? And so what I'm seeing is what Alex wants me to see. Okay, there are two top level checks, one called unit and one called lint, and it tells me what it is. Okay, so give me the unit checks. And so if you're familiar with the GitHub checks API, there's something similar. And this, of course, wraps execution of the Go test suite as specified by Alex. The thing is, I don't know how this was set up. I don't have any Go tooling installed on my machine, right? It's all containerized end to end. It's all Daggerized. And it looks like everything's passing. The part that's missing here that I would love to show, but is in another branch, is each test here is in fact an individual sub check. So instead of a glorified shell script, if you run tests in Dagger today, what happens? You're one way or the other, you're doing a glorified npm run or bash script that's going to execute a command line tool that's going to dump its output, right? And it's going to fail or succeed. And then if it failed, you're going to be looking through the logs to see the results, right? Instead, what we want is to give the developer structured data. Hey, there were two checks, one called unit and one lint. And this check has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, about 20 sub checks. And here's the list of them as structured data. And here's their status. This one passed, this one didn't pass. Actually, this is not a list of checks, but you get the idea. Well, that's actually the perfect example. I'm right now, I still have to read standard output and try to make sense of what's going on, but that's what we're going to get rid of. Instead, there's going to be a clean GraphQL API where you can query things like, show me a list of the checks for this environment and show me their status. And this is just a command line, an approximation of a CLI interface to that. But at any time, you can just discard that CLI and say, you know what, I'm going to write a custom tool, or I'm just going to write a little script, and I'm just going to hit the API directly. And it's going to be a very simple GraphQL query. So for example, that's the Go unit tests. And then this is the linter. What linter, what tool, how is it configured? I don't know. Alex took care of that, and everything passed. Again, in the very near future, instead, I would have a list of the checks and what they were and their success, etc. I'm going to pause here and check the chat for a second because I've been talking a lot. Oh, where's the chat?
There's
any questions or comments or anything I should address?
Yeah, the only Alex, mentioned something about the benefits of this rich data, easier to track things over time, like flaky tests, failure rate, individual test performance regressions, etc. So.
Yeah, exactly. And so now I'm going to hand off, like in a few seconds, I'm going to hand off to Alex, who's the top hat in the situation, to show what the code looks like to create this experience for me. And I just want to make sure, because this is not, I realize that the CLI experience itself is not overwhelming yet because it's very early, but picture this, but with, a declarative data-driven experience, right? I'm not saying run the test. I'm saying, give me a list of the checks and what are the results. And under the hood, the Dagger engine will run whatever pipelines it needs to run to give me the information I need. And that's the key difference here. And so then we're going to do the same thing for artifacts. Hey, what artifacts are in this environment? Oh, I see. There's binaries for different platforms. There's container images. We'll have to figure out a way to organize them, probably just labels, and you just search by label. And then you say, oh, that artifact, that's the one I want. Can you download it to my local disk, or can you push it to that registry, or, and then guess what? On the fly, that artifact gets produced. How is it produced? Is it a build right here? Is it downloaded from somewhere else? Is it just a weird Frankenstein process? I don't need to know. I don't want to know. Right? That's the whole point, right? Um, and I'll just end by saying the key here is when you're developing on your favorite part of the stack, right? The part that you're familiar with the tools you know inside out. If you're a web dev and you're working on, the JavaScript code base and NPM, so the first reaction is this is just an abstraction that gets in the way. And I think that's partially true. And so I think in that scenario, you don't want to force devs to go through Dagger when they can use the tool because it's 100% stuff that they know. But in a real project, it's very rare that everything is 100% only the things you know. It's always your very familiar stack plus a bunch of other things. And that's where everything falls apart. Like you need end-to-end integration tests. And so you need a staging, you need a deployment of the API backend to test against. And that's just another stack, and you're not sure. So here you are in the README and in the Slack asking, hey, I'm trying to set up blah, blah, blah. Oh, no, it's the other branch. And no, we have this thing. So all of that arcane knowledge can now be encoded in this environment in code, right? And now we're going to look at that code. Over to you, Mr. Top Hat.
Yeah, I'm gonna show it.
All right. The two top hats.
Yep. Where is sharing? I am trying to share my screen. Oh, okay. I think I don't see, for some reason, my normal terminal when I'm clicking this. 1 second. Okay, I'll just share my whole desktop. I guess it's fine. Where am I? Here we go. Okay. Actually, one thing, is this readable?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
One thing is, so this is the other branch that Solomon mentioned. And so the UI here is especially unpolished, but this is with subchecks. So this is actually for Dagger's own CI where we want to run lint, but there's actually, a bunch of different SDKs to lint and also our core engine code. So yeah, this is it working. I ran it a little bit ago. It takes a while to run because there's a lot of code, but you can see, Python and Node.js SDKs are good, engine not because we're developing it, but yeah, it's a little preview. Yeah, so the thing I was going to go and show is basically, so Solomon was running a Dagger check unit and Dagger check lint on booklet. And so what is happening underneath the hood a little bit is a whole bunch of magic, and then we're hitting this code basically. And so this is the code that if you're a top hat, so you're someone who actually wants to develop these environments, this is the code you would write. And I will also repeat Solomon's caveat before that this is all early. And I think this part is especially very early because we've kind of been working on the very high level and the extremely low level, like architecture changes. And we've met them together now, but this is sort of the middle part. And as a result, it's kind of the least polished, but should give you a pretty good idea. So, you're a Go developer, you want to write this in Go. But, obviously also we're going to support all of our other SDKs too. But yeah, so in Go, you're saying, okay, so I want an environment and then I want to add checks here. So you're adding a unit check, lint check. We didn't show the build thing before, but basically if you run this one, you have to do Dagger do, then it will build a CLI and output it to your host file system. But yeah, so you're saying, okay, I want to have a unit check as part of my environment. And so then if you go here, it's, not very much at all. So the reason for that is we're actually importing a separate environment. So this is a Go environment where there's all sorts of entry points that have been predefined. So in this case, this environment has Go test, and we don't really need anything very fancy for this. We just basically want to call Go test. So that's all we have to do here. And I think if you look at lint, then we have, same target here for calling the Golang CI lint. And I think for, yeah, the build command, you can see, yeah, that's just calling go env build. Yeah, so I mean, that's really the idea, is you just have to write this code and then you can go and call that and, it'll work. And then if, you need to keep changing the code, it's not like you really need to do anything. You don't need to like, write some new code here and then go and rebuild something and then call Dagger, Dagger check or Dagger do. It just all is built on the fly, with Dagger. So with all the good caching and all that stuff. So yeah, I guess the other thing is that, yeah, I mentioned there's these reusable environments. And so at this exact moment, we're kind of cheating at this. We do have the reusable environments working, but we didn't have time to support all the input types that are needed here. So right now we are actually just importing this as a Go package directly and calling it. But I can give a little bit of an idea here of what this will look like. So now I just switched over not to booklet, but now I'm in the actual Dagger repo. And so there's a new subdirectory called universe. And you can see we've started adding some. So there's the Go env you saw before. There's one for Nix, one for APKO, which is a tool from ChainGuard for making minimal container images from APK packages. This is Dagger's own CI, so on and so forth. But the idea is that, yeah, we're going to, flesh this out. All the common reusable stuff that any sort of environment developer would want, there's a good chance it'll be here. Or if not, then they can obviously make a contribution and add it here or modify anything that they need. Yeah, and so I guess the important part that we didn't have set up quite yet is that these are going to not be language specific. So, I mean, I have the Go env code pulled up here, and it's, obviously written in Go. That would make sense. But any of these other ones could be written with any of our other SDKs, Python, Node.js, but they won't need to be rewritten in different languages. So you, from your Go environment here, will be able to go and use a environment that happens to be written in Python. But you'll have no awareness of that. You won't have to do anything crazy or fancy. You just import it and use it, and then you're good to go. And the magic underneath the hood that makes that possible is that everything here is actually being turned into an API, specifically a GraphQL API. But that's what makes it possible to call them between languages. It's just one language agnostic API underneath all of this. Yeah, are there any questions? Let me check the chat too.
From the Q&A, Nipuna says, love it.
Okay, that's good.
More of a statement. I like that.
Yeah, I think that was in response to, he asked a question just before, which is, so this Go environment could be maintained by the platform team. And I answered yes. And then he replied, love it.
Great.
So that what you just explained, Eric, that's the answer to extensions, right? Basically, we want to have an environment play both roles. It's both something that you can use directly as a developer, right, from your terminal or from a custom tool, Robinhood hat, and it's also something that, wearing a top hat, when you're creating your own environment with code, you can go and get other environments and just load them into your own as an extension. So an environment could be an end user experience, or it can be an extension to another environment, basically. Just just making sure, because that's huge. Just repeating it just for emphasis. Yeah. Because that was the missing piece, right?
That's exactly. Yep. I can try to even show just a very early hint of something like that. So we this is the actual Dagger CI, and so I had it commented out right now, but basically here I'm actually loading, instead of doing an import, I'm actually loading the whole separate environment and then calling check. And so this is we're I guess calling it the type unsafe version of doing this. So if this will let you load these environments, but like I'm calling check go lint and providing that as a string. So if that turns out to not be, an actual target there, then you'll get a runtime error. And then the other thing that we layer on top of this is code gen. So then it would, instead of being all of this stuff, it could just literally be, Dagger and then Go SDK and then lint. And then if that didn't exist, I'm going to get, a compile time error, or I mean, an IDE error, literally, but so as early as possible. So there's kind of a whole like layered approach here of, most end users can probably use the code gen version. More advanced users who want to do something really custom, you have actually a lot more power with this and a lot more customization when you use this kind of lower level API, then they'll have that. And then on the lowest level, there's the raw GraphQL API. So it should end up supporting all use cases pretty seamlessly.
One thing I'll add is, because there's this concept of universe here, we have not yet locked down the details of where, how that ecosystem will be structured in terms of where the actual content lives and how you access it, and the relationship between maintainers and people creating them and people consuming them. There'll probably be a concept of a trusted curated catalog, because I mean, from experience, and for those of you who were there for Dagger 02 and the Q focus, we had a whole universe, and there's a lot of work and risks associated with that. Who's going to maintain them, who's going to be responsible for their quality. So we're going to load all that experience we had plus incorporate experience from others, but it's probably going to be layered. There'll be like, it's really, an environment is really just code. It's a directory with code in it that the Dagger engine can load and understand, right? So it needs a config file, it needs a few things like that. It needs the code, but that could be anywhere. So, the code that Erik showed, it could be, you could run a pipeline that fetches from a Git repo exactly the source checkout that you want, and then loads that as an environment. And then that gets passed into the API, and then you can query that environment. You don't have to go through a centralized marketplace necessarily, but we know from experience that there will be requests for that also. And then, to each their own. But the fact that it's all code driven, it means you can do all sorts of crazy stuff. You could have a matrix that, you want to test a whole list of versions of your app against a whole list of versions of your environment, for example. Those are things you can do, right?
Yeah. Yep.
We had a question on the Q&A from Tibor, and it says, so you could be doing goenv from a Node.js Dagger code, ? How generated would the goenv npm package be?
Yeah. So the first question, yes, absolutely. Like we want every SDK to be interoperable. So you can call between any of them, and it should all be cached and work the same, same behavior. And you also don't even need any awareness of what the language the other one is written in, which is pretty nice. And then, the second part, how generated would, so we don't know yet exact. There's kind of two sort of approaches you can take on a high level to this. One would be that, for every environment in universe or every environment in general, you basically turn that into a package for every single SDK. So it could be, a Go package or a Go module. It could be also a Python package, npm package, etc. So that is one approach. And then the other approach would be that when you define your like a set of environments, then you can do a code gen step at that point and generate one client that has all of that functionality incorporated. And there's kind of a lot of trade-offs between those two approaches. I think our most recent thinking was actually the second one, where you create one client that has all of your dependencies. But the trade-off there is that you have to actually run code gen yourself a little bit more often. So I don't know, that's something that is very much still just like at the idea phase. We have, we've been fleshing out all the other parts first, but it's a good question. So we'll definitely be asking for feedback about that once we start diving into it.
Awesome.
One thing I wanted to address, because that was a question that was just asked, the relationship between the environment code and the application code. That's one thing we're addressing. I'm not going to say we're done addressing it because it is a complex topic and we're going back and forth on it. But like some things I think we have consensus on. The two things really. One thing we have consensus on is different teams work differently, and we should make an effort to fit Dagger into existing workflows as much as possible. That's a generic statement, but it's just a good reminder. And the other one is really that at the core, in its core model with this design, the Dagger does not consider your environment to be tied to one particular application repository. So it probably you will be able to have the code of your environment live in a subdirectory somewhere in your application repository. I'm hoping that becomes an exception over time, because I think it's more of an anti-pattern than most people believe, but that's just my personal opinion. I'm in the minority. I know we have to support it, but what I also know is when the platform itself, it needs you to always tie your environment to a specific application repo, then you're missing out on a lot of cool use cases. And so, an environment just stands on its own. You can have you could write an environment that just it has a command that goes and fetches 1,000 repos, and from there fetches the last 10 commits, and it just loads up a whole matrix of crazy tests and different permutations of dependencies. That should be an environment that's possible. So unlike today, where the kind of de facto best practice is, well, where do I put the code for my environment? Well, probably a CI directory, but some different people do it differently. We're not sure. Like, just try this. Think of the environment as its own standalone software project. That's my recommendation. It's its own application, really. So we'll be able to make that a reality. Hopefully what I said makes sense, but.
That's great. Anything else? Any other questions or anything else to show on the demo side? Or are we pretty good?
You want to give a sneak preview of the Dagger repo, the subchecks, or no?
Oh, I did right at the beginning. That's
sorry,
what this was.
I was
right when I started talking.
Oh,
it's I mean, not a fleshed out UI yet, but you can kind of get the idea of just imagine this, but more beautiful.
Yeah, and Blaze mentions in the Q&A that this is huge for big orgs with distributed development teams. Heck yeah.
Yep. Yeah, the problem gets bigger as the team grows, for sure. I was just realizing actually this morning that this could massively simplify our CI integrations, because when we document how to run Dagger from your favorite CI, we have to give you a very generic example, because really you're configuring your CI to execute some tool that you wrote, and each user has their own custom tool. But now, there's checks, that's a standardized thing. So a whole use case of running Dagger for CI, which is checking things, can be streamlined now, right? Load the environment and run all the checks. That could be a generic, that would be the same YAML configuration for everybody, right?
Yep. And also deploying Dagger potentially, like if you could have an environment that deploys Dagger to a Kubernetes cluster already, that would be very cool. Not just Kubernetes, but anything else.
Oh,
I'm just throwing ideas out, but
I
think
so. Joel's PR from before, right now it's a PR for docs, but in the future it could be, hey, here's the environment we use to provision Dagger to your cluster. That will be awesome, because it will happen.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So for folks that want to continue the conversation, which I'm sure everyone does, there is a Discord channel And Project Zenith is what you'll see in Discord. And we can actually, I'll actually drop this into the chat as well if someone else hasn't beat me to it yet. Here we go. I got it. And that link will take you right to right through the Discord web flow and get you to that channel as well.